The dust from the stagecoach settled on Nora Valmont's skirts as she stepped onto the wooden platform of Cottonwood Springs, clutching her worn leather satchel like it contained all that remained of her dignity. Perhaps it did. The whispers had followed her from Boston to this remote frontier town in Wyoming Territory, whispers that grew into mockery, then outright scorn when she'd fled the scandal that bore her name. The year was 1878, and the world had not been kind to women who chose their own path. Especially women who abandoned fiancés from prominent banking families mere days before their wedding. Nora adjusted her once fashionable bonnet, now rumpled from the 4-day journey. Her honey-brown hair, usually pinned meticulously, had begun to escape in wisps around her face. 22 years old and already considered damaged goods by proper society, she squared her shoulders, better damaged than sold. Last stop, Cottonwood Springs. Called the driver as he tossed down the remaining luggage, a single trunk containing everything she'd managed to take when she'd slipped away in the night. Cottonwood Springs wasn't much to look at. A dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a few horses tied to hitching posts, and the distant silhouette of mountains that seemed to watch her arrival with silent judgment. Nothing like the cobblestone streets and brick townhouses of Boston, where she'd spent her entire life until now. "Need help with that trunk, miss?" A boy no older than 14 approached, his freckled face expectant. "Yes, thank you." She fumbled in her reticule for a coin. "I need to find the crossroads inn. I'm expected." The boy's eyes widened slightly. "You must be the new schoolteacher, then." Nora nodded, relief washing over her. Her cousin Martha had arranged this position through a friend of a friend. It had been her only escape route, and she'd taken it without hesitation. "Yes, I am Miss Valmont." The boy hoisted her trunk onto his shoulder with surprising strength. "Everyone's been talking about you coming. Ain't had a proper teacher in almost a year." Of course they had been talking. In a town this size, a new arrival was likely the most exciting thing to happen in months. She only hoped they wouldn't learn why she had really come. "Tommy. That ain't no way to greet a lady." A deep voice cut through the air, causing both Nora and the boy to turn. The man who approached was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a worn leather vest. A cowboy hat shaded his face, but she could see his strong jawline and the slight curl of dark hair at his collar. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his own skin. "Sorry, Mr. Thornton," the boy mumbled. The man, Mr. Thornton, tipped his hat to Nora. "Madam. Welcome to Cottonwood Springs. I'm Vaughn Thornton. I own the ranch outside of town." Nora extended her hand in greeting, remembering too late that her gloves were packed away in her trunk. Her bare hand seemed inappropriately intimate as he took it briefly in his much larger one. "Nora Valmont." The new schoolteacher. His eyes, a striking shade of blue that reminded her of summer skies, assessed her quickly. "Long journey from the east, I expect," she stiffened. "How did you know I'm from the east?" A smile curved his lips, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Your boots. Too fine for Wyoming mud, and that accent. Boston, if I had to guess." Heat rose to her cheeks. She would need to be more careful. The last thing she needed was this man or anyone else asking too many questions about her past. "Tommy, take Miss Valmont's trunk to the inn," Mr. Thornton instructed, "and tell Mrs. Hale the schoolteacher's arrived." "Yes, sir." The boy hurried off, her trunk bouncing against his back. Nora made to follow, but Mr. Thornton's voice stopped her. "Miss Valmont." She turned, clutching her satchel tighter. "Folks around here are simple, but they're good people. They'll judge you on what you do, not where you came from." Something in his tone made her wonder if he somehow knew more than he should. Impossible, of course. No one here could possibly know about Richard, the broken engagement, or the gossip that had driven her away. "I appreciate the welcome, Mr. Thornton. If you'll excuse me, it's been a long journey," he nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. But as she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her back. It wasn't an unpleasant sensation, but it unsettled her all the same. The Crossroads Inn was a 2-story building with a wide porch and clean windows, one of the more imposing structures in the small town. As Nora climbed the steps, the door swung open to reveal a plump woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. "You must be Miss Valmont," the woman said, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Nora's appearance. "I'm Mrs. Hale. I run this establishment." "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hale." Come in, come in. You look exhausted, poor thing. 4 days on that dreadful coach, I don't know how anyone survives it. Nora followed her into a tidy foyer. The interior was unexpectedly elegant for a frontier town, with polished wood floors and a staircase that curved upward to the second floor. Your room is upstairs, third door on the right. Tommy's already taken up your trunk. Supper's at 6 sharp. The schoolhouse is 2 blocks down next to the church. Mayor wants to meet you tomorrow morning at 8. Mrs. Hale paused, studying Nora's face. You're younger than I expected. I'm 22, Nora replied, lifting her chin slightly, and fully qualified. Well, we'll see about that. Children here aren't like your fancy Eastern pupils. They're ranch kids and shop kids. Most of them work harder before breakfast than city folk do all day. Nora nodded, too tired to defend herself further. I understand, I'll do my best. Mrs. Hale's expression softened slightly. That's all anyone can ask, I suppose. Get some rest, dear. You look ready to drop. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Nora sank onto the bed, removing her bonnet and letting it fall beside her. The enormity of what she had done suddenly crashed over her. She was alone, thousands of miles from everything familiar in a town where she knew no one, but she was free. Free from Richard's controlling grip, free from her parents' disappointment, free from the whispers and stares. A tear slipped down her cheek, followed by another. Not tears of regret, but of relief. The next morning, Nora dressed carefully in her most sensible gown, a dove gray wool with minimal trim. She pinned her hair in a simple style befitting a schoolteacher and steeled herself for the meeting with the mayor. Cottonwood Springs looked different in the morning light. More alive, with shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts and wagons rolling down the street. She nodded politely to the people she passed, aware of their curious glances. The mayor's office was a small room attached to the general store. Mayor Wilson was a balding man with friendly eyes and a walrus mustache that quivered when he spoke. Miss Valmont, welcome to our little town. He shook her hand enthusiastically. We're mighty pleased to have someone of your qualifications taking over our school. Thank you, Mayor Wilson. I'm eager to begin. Term starts next Monday. That'll give you a few days to settle in and prepare. We have 28 pupils, ages 6 to 16. The last teacher left rather abruptly, family emergency back east. Or so they said, Nora thought. She wondered what had really driven the previous teacher away. I've taken the liberty of asking our school board chairman to meet us at the schoolhouse. He'll show you around, get you acquainted with what you'll need. They walked together to the schoolhouse, a one-room building with large windows and a bell tower. Simple but well-maintained. Inside, rows of desks faced a larger desk and blackboard. Bookcases lined one wall, though they looked sparsely filled. Miss Valmont, meet Vaughn Thornton, chairman of our school board. Nora nearly stumbled in surprise as the cowboy from yesterday stepped forward from where he'd been examining the blackboard. Today, he'd foregone his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. We've met, Vaughn said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. Good morning, Miss Valmont, Mr. Thornton. She nodded stiffly. I didn't realize you were involved with the school. Education's important out here, he replied. I donate the firewood for winter and help with repairs. Most of the ranch hands' children attend. Mayor Wilson beamed. Thornton Ranch is the lifeblood of our community, largest employer in the county. The mayor exaggerates, Vaughn said, though his tone was pleased. But I do have a vested interest in making sure our children receive a proper education. Do you have children of your own attending, Mr. Thornton? Nora asked, immediately regretting the personal question. No, madam, not married. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than was strictly proper. But my foreman has 3, and several of my hands have young ones. Mayor Wilson cleared his throat. I'll leave you to discuss school matters. Miss Valmont, the town council will host a small welcome gathering at the church on Sunday after services. A chance for you to meet the parents. After the mayor left, Nora found herself alone with Vaughn Thornton. She moved to the teacher's desk, running her fingers along its worn surface to avoid his gaze. You seem nervous, Miss Valmont. She looked up sharply. Not at all, merely eager to begin organizing my classroom. He approached, stopping a respectful distance away. The children will like you, I think. They need someone who cares. You don't know that I care, Mr. Thornton. We've only just met. You wouldn't have come all this way if you didn't. He pulled a key from his pocket and placed it on the desk. This is yours, schoolhouse and supply closet. The books are outdated, but I've ordered new readers from Denver. Should arrive before term starts. Thank you. She took the key, careful not to let their fingers touch. Town takes turns with upkeep. Mothers clean on Saturdays. Mr. Perkins at the general store will provide chalk and slates as needed. Just put it on the school account. Nora nodded, making mental notes. And discipline, a shadow crossed his face. Previous teacher was fond of the switch. I'd prefer other methods be tried first. I have no intention of beating children, Mr. Thornton. His expression relaxed. Glad to hear it. Some of these kids have hard enough lives without adding welts to their troubles. There was something in his voice, a personal note that made her wonder about his own school days. Will there be anything else? She asked, eager to be alone with her thoughts. Just one thing. He moved toward the door but paused with his hand on the latch. People talk in small towns, they speculate. They wonder why a Boston-educated woman would choose Cottonwood Springs, Wyoming. His eyes, so intensely blue, met hers. Whatever brought you here is your business. But if you need a friend, Miss Valmont, you have one. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the empty desks and the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. The days before school began passed in a blur of preparation. Nora cleaned and organized the schoolhouse, familiarized herself with the textbooks, and planned her lessons. She met more townspeople, including the blacksmith, the doctor, and several mothers who brought their children to meet her in advance. On Sunday, she attended the church service, sitting quietly in the back pew. She felt the stares, heard the whispers, but kept her eyes forward and her expression serene. The service was simple but heartfelt, the congregation lifting their voices in hymns that echoed against the wooden walls. Afterward, at the welcome gathering, she shook hands and smiled until her face hurt. She remembered names, complimented children, assured parents of her dedication to education. Throughout it all, she was acutely aware of Vaughn Thornton's presence across the room, talking with men in similar ranching attire. Miss Valmont, a sharp voice cut through her conversation with the doctor's wife. A word, if you please. A tall woman with pinched features and expensive, if outdated, clothing gestured for Nora to join her near the refreshment table. Mrs. Blackwood, the doctor's wife murmured to Nora. Town busybody, be careful. Nora pasted on a smile and approached the woman. Mrs. Blackwood, how lovely to meet you, indeed. The woman's eyes were cold as she assessed Nora. My grandson Joshua will be in your class. He's exceptionally bright, takes after his grandfather. I expect you to challenge him appropriately. Of course. I look forward to teaching him. Mrs. Blackwood leaned closer, her voice dropping. I've made inquiries about you, Miss Valmont. Curious, isn't it, how a woman of your background would abandon Boston society for this? She gestured dismissively at their surroundings. Nora's heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. I wanted to make a difference. The frontier needs educated teachers. How noble. Mrs. Blackwood's tone made the word an insult. Though I wonder if your former fiancé shares that sentiment. Ice flooded Nora's veins. How could this woman possibly know about Richard? I'm afraid I don't know what you mean. My sister lives in Boston, Miss Valmont. She writes frequently. Society circles are quite abuzz with the story of a certain banking heir left at the altar. She smiled thinly. Or rather, abandoned days before, Nora fought to keep her composure. If you'll excuse me, Mrs. Blackwood, I should greet the other parents. Of course. The woman's voice followed her as she turned away. We'll speak again soon, I'm sure. Small towns are so intimate. Everyone eventually learns everything. Nora pushed her way through the crowd, desperate for air. She slipped out the side door into the churchyard, gulping in the cool autumn breeze. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her stomach. It had found her already. The scandal, the gossip, the judgment. She had run thousands of miles, and still it followed like a shadow. Miss Valmont, she whirled to find Vaughn Thornton standing a few feet away, concern etched on his features. Are you unwell? I'm fine. The lie fell flat between them, just needed some air. He moved closer, his expression softening. Mrs. Blackwood has that effect on people, like a vulture circling. Despite herself, Nora let out a small laugh, an apt description. Don't let her rattle you, her bark is worse than her bite. She knows things about me. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. Vaughn's eyes narrowed slightly. Mrs. Blackwood thinks she knows everything about everyone, doesn't make it true. But what if it is? Nora whispered, looking away. What if what she knows is true? He was quiet for a moment, then said, "We all have pasts, Miss Valmont. Out here, it's what you do now that counts." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. She blinked rapidly, determined not to cry. "I should return to the gathering," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Allow me to escort you." He offered his arm. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand on his sleeve. His solidness beside her was reassuring as they re-entered the church. Mrs. Blackwood watched them with narrowed eyes, but Nora lifted her chin and smiled. Let her stare, let her whisper. Nora would not be driven away again. The first day of school arrived crisp and clear. Nora rang the bell at precisely 8 o'clock, her heart fluttering with anticipation as children began filing into the schoolhouse. They ranged from tiny first years with shining faces to lanky teenagers trying to appear uninterested. "Good morning," she said once they were all seated. "I am Miss Valmont and I will be your teacher. We'll begin by learning a bit about each other." The morning progressed smoothly. The children were mostly attentive, if curious about their new teacher. She had them read aloud, tested their arithmetic, and began to assess their various levels of education. Joshua Blackwood, a thin boy of 12 with his grandmother's cold eyes, watched her with undisguised suspicion. When called upon, his answers were correct but delivered with a challenging tone that set her teeth on edge. At noon, she dismissed them for lunch. Most ran outside to eat their packed meals in the schoolyard, but Joshua lingered. "Is there something I can help you with, Joshua?" she asked, arranging papers on her desk. "Grandmother says you ran away from Boston because you did something shameful." His voice was matter-of-fact, without malice but without compassion either. Nora's fingers stilled on the papers. "Your grandmother should not discuss such matters with you." "Is it true?" She looked at him directly. "Would it change how well I teach you if it were?" He considered this, head tilted. "I suppose not. Then perhaps we should focus on your education rather than on gossip." A flicker of respect crossed his face before he nodded and left the schoolhouse. The afternoon session was more challenging. The younger children grew restless, and 2 of the older boys began passing notes. Nora confiscated them, establishing her authority with a firm but fair hand. By dismissal time, she was exhausted but satisfied with her first day. As the children filtered out, she noticed a figure on horseback waiting across the street. Vaughn Thornton sat astride a magnificent chestnut stallion, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. He nodded to her as the last child departed. Nora stepped onto the schoolhouse porch. "Mr. Thornton, are you checking up on me?" He dismounted, leading his horse across the street. "Thought I'd see how your first day went." Surprisingly well, they're bright children, most of them, and Mrs. Blackwood's grandson. His lips quirked in a half-smile. Nora sighed. "Challenging but intelligent. He'll come around. You seem confident." "I've dealt with difficult pupils before," she replied, thinking of the finishing school where she had briefly taught in Boston. "Those girls, with their wealth and privilege, could be far crueler than any frontier child." "I have no doubt." He glanced at the schoolhouse. "Any supplies you're lacking? A few maps would be helpful, and perhaps more readers for the younger children." He nodded. "I'll see what I can arrange." He hesitated, then added, "Some of us are having dinner at the hotel restaurant tonight." "Nothing formal. Would you care to join us? Might be a good way to meet more folks." Nora considered declining, then remembered Mrs. Blackwood's smug face. Hiding away would only feed the gossip. "I'd be delighted, thank you." 6 o'clock then. As she watched him ride away, Nora felt a curious warmth in her chest. It had been a long time since anyone had simply shown her kindness without expectation. The hotel restaurant was more elegant than Nora had expected, with white tablecloths and decent china. She wore her second-best dress, a midnight blue with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. As she entered, she saw Vaughn rise from a table where he sat with 3 other men and a woman. "Miss Valmont," he called, waving her over. "Join us, please." The other diners, mostly locals, watched with interest as she crossed the room. She held her head high, smiling politely at those she recognized. "Miss Valmont, may I introduce Dr. James Hayes and his wife Sarah, Mr. Robert Turner, who owns the bank, and Mr. Daniel Foster, my foreman." She greeted each in turn, settling into the chair Vaughn held for her. The conversation flowed easily, covering topics from cattle prices to Denver politics to books recently received at the general store. No one mentioned Boston or her past, for which she was grateful. "How was your first day teaching our wild bunch?" Sarah Hayes asked, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Enlightening," Nora replied with a smile. "Your son Thomas has quite a talent for mathematics," Sarah beamed. "He gets that from his father. James was top of his class at medical school." "You flatter me, dear," Dr. Hayes said, though he looked pleased. "Miss Valmont was just telling me the school could use some new maps," Vaughn interjected. Robert Turner nodded thoughtfully. "The bank could sponsor those, good advertising and tax-deductible besides." "And we still need to replace that broken window before winter," Daniel Foster added. "I can send a couple of hands over this weekend." Nora was touched by their willingness to help. "You're all very generous." "Community takes care of its own," Vaughn said, his eyes meeting hers warmly. The rest of the meal passed pleasantly. By the time they finished their apple pie, Nora felt more at ease than she had in months. These people, despite their curiosity about her, seemed genuinely welcoming. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Blackwood entered the restaurant with an elderly man Nora assumed was her husband. The woman's eyes narrowed at the sight of Nora in Vaughn's company. "Miss Valmont," she said, her voice carrying, "how nice to see you socializing. Joshua mentioned you had quite the interesting first day." "Your grandson is a bright student, Mrs. Blackwood," Nora replied evenly. "I look forward to challenging him this term." "Indeed." Her gaze shifted to Vaughn. "Mr. Thornton, I'm surprised to see you in town on a weeknight." "No pressing ranch business?" "Sometimes business is about building relationships, Mrs. Blackwood," he replied smoothly. "Something I believe your late husband understood well." The woman's face tightened. "Gerald always knew the importance of propriety in those relationships." The implied criticism hung in the air. Vaughn merely smiled and offered Nora his arm. "Shall we, Miss Valmont? It's getting late." Outside, the night air was cool against Nora's flushed cheeks. "Thank you for the rescue," he chuckled. "Eleanor Blackwood has been trying to marry me off to her niece for 3 years. Nothing to do with you." "Oh," she felt oddly disappointed. "May I walk you back to the inn?" She nodded, and they strolled down the quiet street. Most businesses were closed, only the saloon showing signs of activity. "You handled yourself well today," Vaughn said after a moment. "With the children and with Mrs. Blackwood." "Years of practice," she murmured. "Boston society isn't so different from a small town in some ways." The same judgments, just delivered in more refined language. "Is that why you left?" "The judgments?" Nora hesitated, then decided a partial truth was better than none. "I was engaged. I broke it off when I realized I would suffocate in that life." Takes courage to walk away from what's expected. Some call it cowardice. Those people have never had to fight for their own path. His voice held a note of something personal, a hint of his own struggles. They reached the inn too quickly. Nora paused at the bottom of the steps, reluctant to end their conversation. "Thank you for including me tonight," she said. "It was nice to feel welcome." "You are welcome, Nora." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sent an unexpected thrill through her. "Despite what some might say, most folks here are glad you've come." Their eyes held for a long moment, then he tipped his hat and stepped back. "Good night, Miss Valmont." "Good night, Mr. Thornton." As she prepared for bed that night, Nora found herself thinking of Vaughn's words. Takes courage to walk away from what's expected. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps fleeing Boston hadn't been cowardice after all, but the bravest thing she'd ever done. The weeks passed, and autumn painted the surrounding hills in golds and reds. Nora settled into a routine, finding satisfaction in her students' progress and in the gradual acceptance of the townspeople. She attended church socials, took tea with Sarah Hayes, and even joined a small reading circle that met monthly. Mrs. Blackwood continued to watch her with suspicious eyes, but the woman's influence seemed limited. Joshua, surprisingly, had become one of Nora's most dedicated pupils, thriving under her encouragement of his natural intelligence. Vaughn visited the school regularly, ostensibly to check on repairs or deliver books, but Nora suspected he came to see her as much as the children. Their conversations, brief though they were, became highlights of her days. Sometimes he brought her wildflowers for the schoolroom or interesting rocks he thought the children might enjoy examining. One crisp October afternoon, as her students filed out, he appeared with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Special delivery," he said, placing it on her desk. From Denver. Nora unwrapped it to find several beautifully illustrated maps of the United States, Europe, and the world. "Vaughn, these are wonderful." She traced the colorful boundaries with her fingertip. "The children will be thrilled. Thought you might like them." He looked pleased at her reaction. "Got something else, too." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small volume of poetry. "Noticed you didn't have much to read at the inn. Mrs. Hale mentioned it." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Nora accepted the book. "Tennyson, one of my favorites." "Mine too." He shifted, suddenly looking less confident. "Miss Valmont, Nora, I was wondering if you might join me for a ride on Saturday. Weather's supposed to be fine, and there's a spot up in the hills with a view of the whole valley. Thought you might enjoy seeing more of the area." Her heart quickened. This was more than a friendly invitation, they both knew it. "I'd like that very much." His smile lit his entire face. "I'll collect you at 10 if that suits." "It does." She clutched the book to her chest, feeling suddenly girlish and giddy. As he left, Nora realized she was smiling so broadly her cheeks hurt. For the first time since arriving in Cottonwood Springs, she felt something beyond the relief of escape. She felt hope. Saturday dawned clear and cool, perfect for riding. Nora dressed in her one riding habit, a deep green wool that had been fashionable in Boston 2 years ago. She braided her hair securely and donned a matching hat with a small feather. Vaughn arrived precisely at 10, leading 2 horses, his chestnut stallion and a gentle-looking bay mare. "You look lovely," he said, his admiration evident in his eyes. "Thank you." She allowed him to help her mount, settling comfortably in the side saddle. "It's been a while since I've ridden." "Daisy's gentle as they come. She'll take good care of you." They rode at an easy pace through town and out along a well-worn trail that wound into the foothills. The landscape opened around them vast, golden grasslands giving way to pine-covered slopes and rocky outcroppings. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of sage and pine. "It's beautiful," Nora breathed, taking in the expansive view, different from Boston, I expect. "Completely. There, everything is contained, controlled. Here." She gestured at the wild landscape. "Here it feels like you could breathe forever and never fill your lungs." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's why I stayed. Came out from Tennessee after the war looking for something. Bigger, I guess. Found it here." "You fought in the war." She studied him with new interest. "Confederate cavalry." "Not something I'm proud of now, but I was 18 and full of misguided notions of honor." His expression darkened. "Lost my brother at Shiloh, made me question a lot of things. I'm sorry about your brother, been a long time now." He guided his horse around a bend in the trail. "What about your family? They must miss you." Nora's grip tightened on the reins. "My parents were disappointed in my decision to break my engagement. They had invested a great deal in securing Richard as a son-in-law. His family owns one of Boston's largest banks. And they valued that connection more than your happiness. They didn't see it that way. To them, I was throwing away security, position, everything a woman should want." She swallowed hard. "My father told me if I walked away, I shouldn't bother coming back." Vaughn's expression hardened. "Seems a harsh judgment from a parent. The Valmonts are not known for their warmth," she said wryly. "My mother wrote once after I arrived here, just to make sure I was alive, I think. She mentioned that Richard has already become engaged to someone else." "And how did that make you feel?" "Relieved," she admitted. "I never loved him. I tried because it was expected, but—" She shook her head. "He wanted a pretty ornament, not a partner, someone to host his dinner parties and bear his children and never have a thought he hadn't approved first." They rode in companionable silence for a while, climbing higher into the hills. Finally, Vaughn led them to a clearing at the edge of a cliff. Below, the valley spread out like a painting, the town a tiny collection of buildings in the distance. "This is my thinking spot," he said as they dismounted. "Come here when I need perspective." Nora walked to the edge, marveling at the vista. "I can see why. It makes everything else seem small." He spread a blanket on a flat rock and unpacked a simple lunch: bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of cider. They sat side by side, eating and talking as the sun climbed higher. "Can I ask you something personal?" Vaughn said eventually. Nora nodded, curious. Why teaching? Seems like a Boston lady would have other options. She smiled, pleased he'd asked. I've always loved learning. My governess encouraged it, even when my parents thought it improper for a girl to be too educated. When I finished school, I taught briefly at a girls' academy. Her smile faded. Until my engagement, Richard didn't think it appropriate for his future wife to work. His loss, Vaughn said simply. Those children adore you, even Joshua Blackwood, though he'd die before admitting it. Nora laughed. He is coming around. Yesterday he stayed after class to ask about algebra. Said his grandmother doesn't think it necessary, but he wants to learn anyway. Good for him. Vaughn's eyes crinkled with his smile. Standing up to a leaner Blackwood takes courage. Speaking of Mrs. Blackwood, Nora hesitated. She knows about my broken engagement. Has been hinting at it to others. Vaughn's jaw tightened. Has anyone been unkind to you because of it? No. In fact, Sarah Hayes told me yesterday that she left her first fiancé at the altar and ran off with the doctor instead. Said it was the best decision she ever made. He chuckled. That sounds like Sarah. Look, Nora, people will talk, they always do, but they'll judge you more on how you treat their children than on what you did before you came here. I hope you're right. She took a deep breath. I don't regret leaving Boston or Richard. But sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly belong anywhere. His hand covered hers, warm and steady. You belong wherever you choose to put down roots. Could be here if you wanted. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then a distant rumble of thunder broke the spell. Vaughn glanced at the sky where dark clouds had begun gathering over the western mountains. Storm's coming. We should head back. They packed quickly and mounted, setting off at a faster pace than before. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Going to be a bad one, Vaughn called over his shoulder. Might not make it back before it hits. Sure enough, they were still a mile from town when the first fat drops began to fall. Within minutes, it had become a downpour. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a crack of thunder that made Nora's horse shy nervously. My ranch is closer than town, Vaughn shouted above the storm. Follow me. They veered off the main trail onto a narrower path that led through a stand of trees. Rain lashed at them, soaking through Nora's riding habit and plastering her hair to her face. She could barely see Vaughn ahead of her, just the dark shape of his horse moving through the gloom. Finally, buildings loomed ahead, a large main house and several outbuildings. They rode directly to the barn, where Vaughn helped her dismount with hands that lingered briefly at her waist. You're soaked through, he said, concern evident in his voice. Let's get you inside and warmed up. They left the horses with a stable hand and dashed through the rain to the main house. Inside, it was warm and inviting, with a large stone fireplace and comfortable furnishings. Not luxurious like Boston homes, but solid and welcoming. Wait here, Vaughn said, disappearing down a hallway. Nora stood dripping on the polished wooden floor, shivering despite the warmth of the room. She removed her ruined hat, wincing at the sodden feather. Vaughn returned with a bundle of clothing and a towel. My sister's things. She visits sometimes from Denver. These should fit well enough until your clothes dry. Your sister. Nora hadn't known he had a sister. Victoria, married a banker. He smiled wryly. Don't worry, she's nothing like your former fiancé. She runs half his business while he takes credit for it. He showed her to a bedroom where she could change. The dress he'd provided was simple but well made, a soft blue cotton that was only slightly too large. She toweled her hair as best she could and rebraided it, though without pins it wouldn't stay properly in place. When she emerged, Vaughn had also changed and was building up the fire. He turned at her approach, his eyes warming appreciatively. Better. Much, thank you. She settled into a chair near the fire, extending her hands toward the warmth. Your home is lovely. Built it myself, mostly. Took 3 years. Pride colored his voice. Started with just the kitchen and 1 bedroom, added on as the ranch grew. It suits you. A middle-aged woman appeared with a tray of coffee and sandwiches. Thought you might be hungry after your ride, Mr. Thornton. Thank you, Mrs. Cooper. This is Miss Valmont, our new schoolteacher. Miss Valmont, my housekeeper, Mrs. Cooper. The woman nodded respectfully. Pleasure, miss. My Charlie speaks highly of you, says you're the first teacher who's made him enjoy reading. Charlie is a delight to teach, Nora replied, remembering the freckle-faced 10-year-old with a gift for storytelling. After Mrs. Cooper left, they ate by the fire while the storm raged outside. The coffee was hot and strong, exactly what Nora needed to chase away the last of the chill. "I should get you back to town once the storm passes," Vaughn said. "Mrs. Hale will be wondering where you are." "Yes, I suppose she will." Nora felt oddly reluctant to leave the cozy intimacy of his home. "Thank you for today, Vaughn. It was wonderful despite the rain. Next time we'll check the weather more carefully." His eyes held hers. "There will be a next time, I hope." "I'd like that." Her voice was soft, almost shy. He moved to sit beside her on the sofa, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Nora, I know you came here running from something or someone, and I respect that you might not be looking for entanglements." "Entanglements?" She raised an eyebrow, suddenly bold. "Is that what this is?" A smile tugged at his lips. "I'm trying to be a gentleman here." "Perhaps I don't want a gentleman." The words surprised her as much as him. Richard was a gentleman by Boston standards at least, always proper, always correct, never a hair out of place or a word misspoken, and that wasn't what you wanted. No. She looked into the fire, gathering her thoughts. "I wanted someone real, someone who sees me, really sees me, not just what I represent or what I can provide." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "I see you, Nora Valmont. I've seen you since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, trying so hard to be brave while your world was falling apart." Her breath caught. "And what did you see?" "Strength. Courage. A woman who chose the hardest path because it was the right one." His free hand came up to brush a stray tendril of hair from her face. "A woman I've been falling in love with day by day." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Nora's heart pounded as she leaned toward him, drawn by something more powerful than propriety or caution. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened. His hand cupped her cheek, then slid into her hair, loosening the already precarious braid. She gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, letting herself get lost in the sensation of being wanted, truly wanted for herself alone. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Nora felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside her. The walls she'd built around her heart since fleeing Boston began to crumble. "I should apologize," Vaughn murmured, his forehead resting against hers, "but I'm not sorry." "Neither am I," she smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Though Mrs. Blackwood would have a fit if she could see us now," he laughed, the sound rich and warm, "all the more reason to continue." Outside, the storm began to subside, the thunder growing more distant. But inside, Nora felt as though a different kind of storm had just begun, one that might reshape her entire future. As promised, Vaughn returned her to town once the rain stopped. They rode side by side, stealing glances and sharing smiles that spoke volumes. At the inn, he helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. "I'll call on you properly tomorrow," he said, "if that's acceptable." "Very acceptable." She handed him his sister's dress, carefully wrapped in paper. "Thank you again." He tipped his hat with a smile that made her heart skip. "Until tomorrow, Miss Valmont." Nora floated into the inn, barely noticing Mrs. Hale's curious glance or the other boarders in the sitting room. Her mind was full of Vaughn, his kiss, his confession, the feeling of rightness she'd experienced in his arms. For the first time since fleeing Boston, she didn't feel like she was running away from something. Instead, she felt as though she had been running toward something all along, toward him, toward this life, toward a future she could choose for herself. True to his word, Vaughn called the next afternoon. Mrs. Hale showed him to the inn's parlor with a knowing smile that suggested she approved of the match. Nora joined him, wearing her best day dress and trying to calm her racing heart. "Miss Valmont," he greeted her formally, though his eyes danced with private humor. "I hope you're recovered from yesterday's adventure." "Fully recovered, thank you, Mr. Thornton." She sat across from him, mindful of Mrs. Hale hovering nearby, "though my hat may never be the same." "A tragedy indeed," he cleared his throat. "I was hoping you might accompany me to the harvest dance next Saturday. The whole town attends, it's quite the event." "I'd be delighted." She had heard the other teachers discussing the annual dance with excitement. "Though I should warn you, I'm not particularly accomplished at country dances. I'll teach you." The promise in his voice made her blush. Their courtship progressed with a speed that would have scandalized Boston society but seemed perfectly natural in Cottonwood Springs. Vaughn called on her regularly, escorted her to church, and often joined her for meals at the hotel restaurant. They rode together on weekends, exploring the beautiful countryside and learning each other's stories. Nora discovered that beneath Vaughn's confident exterior lay a thoughtful, sometimes brooding man who had known his share of hardship. The war had left its scars, as had the early years of building his ranch from nothing. He spoke of working 18-hour days, of nearly losing everything in the harsh winter of '68, of learning ranching through bitter trial and error. In turn, she shared more of her own past her stifling upbringing, her brief taste of independence as a teacher, the slow realization that marriage to Richard would extinguish the person she was meant to be. "He wanted to change everything about me," she confessed one evening as they walked along the creek behind the schoolhouse. "My opinions, my interests, even the way I dressed, said I was too outspoken, too independent for a banker's wife." "His loss," Vaughn said simply, squeezing her hand. "I wouldn't change a thing about you." The harvest dance was held in the town hall, decorated with autumn leaves and corn husks. Lanterns cast a golden glow over the proceedings as a small band played lively tunes. Nora wore her best dress, a deep burgundy silk that she'd brought from Boston, with her hair arranged in an elegant knot. Vaughn couldn't take his eyes off her as they whirled through the dances. He proved a patient teacher, guiding her through the unfamiliar steps with a firm hand at her waist. By the end of the evening, she was flushed with exertion and happiness, laughing freely as they joined the other couples in a spirited Virginia reel. "You're a natural," he told her during a break, bringing her a cup of punch. "I have an excellent partner." She smiled up at him, not caring who noticed their closeness. Most of the town seemed to approve of their courtship. Sarah Hayes had told her frankly that it was about time Vaughn Thornton found himself a worthy woman, and even Mayor Wilson had hinted that a settled family man made a more credible school board chairman. Only Mrs. Blackwood maintained her disapproval, watching them with narrow eyes and tight lips. The woman had taken to stopping by the schoolhouse unannounced, ostensibly to check on her grandson's progress, but clearly to monitor Nora's teaching methods. "She's hoping to catch you in some impropriety," Sarah warned Nora over tea one afternoon. "Been telling anyone who'll listen that you're not what you seem," Nora sighed. "I suppose that's true enough. I did run away from an engagement." "Half the women in this town have stories they'd rather not share," Sarah replied firmly. "Including Alina Blackwood herself, though she pretends otherwise. Did you know she was a saloon girl in Denver before she married old Gerald? Man was 30 years her senior and rich as Croesus." Despite her determination not to let Mrs. Blackwood's disapproval affect her, Nora found herself growing anxious as November progressed. The woman's insinuations were becoming bolder, and several parents had asked pointed questions about Nora's background. Then, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, disaster struck in the form of a letter from Boston. Nora was grading arithmetic exercises when Tommy, the boy who helped at the post office, burst into the schoolhouse after hours. "Miss Valmont, got a letter for you, special delivery from back east." Her stomach clenched as she accepted the thick envelope. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the return address made her blood run cold. Richard's law firm in Boston. She waited until Tommy left before opening it with trembling fingers. Inside was a formal letter from Richard's attorney, along with newspaper clippings and a brief, cutting note from Richard himself. The attorney's letter was clinical, threatening legal action for breach of promise unless she returned to Boston immediately to make amends for the damage to Mr. Blackwell's reputation. Richard's note was worse. He informed her that he had learned of her whereabouts from his cousin, who had connections in Wyoming territory, and that unless she returned to face the consequences of her actions with dignity, he would ensure that her reputation was destroyed not only in Boston but in her new home as well. The newspaper clippings told the story as Boston society saw it. Banking heir abandoned by fortune-hunting fiancé. Valmont daughter flees family disgrace. And worst of all, questions arise about missing Blackwell family heirlooms after broken engagement. The implication was clear. Richard was suggesting she had stolen from him before fleeing. Nora sank into her chair, the papers slipping from her numb fingers. It was her worst nightmare come to life. Richard had found her, and he was determined to punish her for the humiliation of being left. She didn't realize she was crying until a tear splashed onto the desk. Hastily, she gathered the papers and stuffed them back into the envelope. She needed to think, to plan. If Richard made good on his threats, her position in Cottonwood Springs would become untenable. The school board would have no choice but to dismiss her, and Vaughn, what would he think? He knew she had broken an engagement, but theft. Would he believe her over the evidence Richard could manufacture? Lost in her dark thoughts, she didn't hear the schoolhouse door open. Nora. Vaughn's voice startled her. Tommy said you received an important letter. I thought I'd check if everything was. He stopped, seeing her tear-streaked face. What's happened? She tried to hide the envelope, but it was too late. He crossed the room in long strides, concern etched on his features. Tell me, he said gently, kneeling beside her chair. It's Richard, she whispered. He's found me. He's threatening to destroy my reputation here if I don't return to Boston. Vaughn's expression hardened. May I? He gestured to the envelope. After a moment's hesitation, she handed it to him. She watched his face as he read, noting the tightening of his jaw and the darkening of his eyes. This is blackmail, he said finally, his voice controlled but angry, and these allegations of theft are clearly false. Of course they are, she said, relieved that he believed her without question. But who will take my word over his? He's Richard Blackwell of the Boston Blackwells. His family practically owns the city. Vaughn was silent for a long moment, rereading the lawyer's letter. Then he looked up, determination in his eyes. You're not facing this alone, Nora. What can we do? If he sends these accusations to the school board, to the parents, then we'll fight them together. He took her hands in his. Do you trust me? She nodded without hesitation. With everything. Then marry me. The proposal, so unexpected in the midst of crisis, left her speechless. I know it's sudden, he continued, his grip tightening on her hands, and I had planned something more romantic. But I love you, Nora. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing on that platform, looking so lost and so determined all at once. Vaughn, as my wife, you'll have my name, my protection. The Thornton name means something in this territory, and no one, not some Boston banker, not Alina Blackwood, not anyone will be able to take away what we build together. Tears welled in her eyes again, but these were different tears of hope, of possibility. Are you certain? This scandal could touch you too. Let it try. His voice was steel. I've faced worse than gossip and come through standing. She searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity and love. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. His kiss was fierce and possessive, a promise and a pledge all at once. When they broke apart, she felt steadier, stronger. What do we do about Richard's threats? She asked. Vaughn's smile was grim. First, we get married as soon as possible. Then we show this Blackwell fellow that he's picked the wrong woman to intimidate. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Vaughn insisted they marry immediately, and Nora, recognizing the wisdom in presenting a united front, agreed. The minister was willing, and a license was quickly obtained. They decided on a small ceremony at Vaughn's ranch the following Saturday. Sarah Hayes helped Nora prepare, lending her a beautiful ivory lace shawl that had been her own mother's. Something borrowed, Sarah said with a wink. Word spread quickly through the small town. Most reactions were supportive, if surprised at the sudden timing. Mrs. Hale sniffed that it was about time and began packing Nora's belongings without being asked. Only Mrs. Blackwood made her disapproval known, arriving at the schoolhouse during lunch break on Friday, the day before the wedding. Miss Valmont, I feel it my duty to speak frankly, she began without preamble. This hasty marriage raises serious questions about your character. Nora, who had been preparing Monday's lessons, set down her chalk calmly. Does it, Mrs. Blackwood? I wasn't aware that love required a particular timetable. Love, the older woman scoffed. A convenient excuse. I wonder if Mr. Thornton knows the full extent of your history. Nora's heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. Had Mrs. Blackwood somehow learned of Richard's accusations? My history is no secret from my fiancé. Indeed, Mrs. Blackwood withdrew a folded newspaper from her reticule, including this. It was one of the Boston papers, the same story that Richard had sent. Nora's stomach dropped, but she forced herself to meet the woman's gaze steadily. Yes, including that. Mr. Thornton is fully aware of my broken engagement and the creative interpretation the Boston papers have given it. Mrs. Blackwood looked momentarily disconcerted by Nora's composure. "These are serious allegations, Miss Valmont. Theft of family heirlooms are completely false, as Mr. Thornton knows." Nora stood, tired of being on the defensive. "Mrs. Blackwood, I understand you feel it your duty to protect this community. But I must ask, why this vendetta against me? What have I done to earn such enmity?" The woman's lips tightened. "I recognize your type, Miss Valmont, women who use their youth and beauty to manipulate good men. My Gerald was taken in by such a woman before me, nearly ruined him financially. I won't stand by and watch Vaughn Thornton make the same mistake." Suddenly, Nora understood. It wasn't about her at all, it was about Mrs. Blackwood's own insecurities, her own past. "I'm sorry for what happened to your husband," she said gently. "But I'm not that woman. I love Vaughn and he loves me. Tomorrow we'll be married, and I hope that in time you'll see that my intentions are honorable." Mrs. Blackwood stared at her for a long moment, then refolded the newspaper. "We shall see, Miss Valmont, we shall see." After she left, Nora sank back into her chair, shaken but relieved. At least the confrontation was over, and she had stood her ground. Whatever Mrs. Blackwood chose to do with the information from Boston, Nora and Vaughn would face it together. Saturday dawned clear and cold, a perfect late November day. Nora dressed in her best gown, not a wedding dress, but a lovely cream-colored silk with pearl buttons that she'd brought from Boston for special occasions. Sarah Hayes arrived early to help with her hair, arranging it in an elegant style adorned with small white flowers from the doctor's greenhouse. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, stepping back to admire her work. "Vaughn won't know what hit him." They traveled to the ranch in the Hayes buggy, Dr. James driving, while Sarah kept up a steady stream of cheerful conversation designed to distract Nora from her nerves. The ranch house had been transformed. Mrs. Cooper had polished every surface until it gleamed, and vases of dried autumn flowers and evergreen boughs adorned the rooms. A small group awaited them: the minister, Mayor Wilson and his wife, Daniel Foster and his family, and several of Vaughn's closest ranch hands. Nora felt a momentary pang that her own family wasn't present, that her father wouldn't walk her down the aisle. But as Dr. Hayes offered his arm to escort her into the parlor where Vaughn waited, she realized she had found a new family here. Vaughn stood by the fireplace, more formally dressed than she had ever seen him, in a black suit and crisp white shirt. His eyes, when they found hers, lit with such love that her last doubts vanished. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple gold bands that Vaughn had purchased from the jeweler in the next town over. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vaughn's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all that was to come. The small reception afterward was warm and festive. Mrs. Cooper had prepared a feast, and someone had brought a fiddle. They danced in the cleared space of the dining room, Nora's cream silk swirling around Vaughn's black-clad legs as he twirled her. "Happy, Mrs. Thornton?" he murmured in her ear during a slower dance. The name sent a thrill through her. "Happier than I ever thought possible." Later, after the guests had departed with good wishes and knowing smiles, they stood together on the porch, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. "Welcome home," Vaughn said, his arm around her waist. Home. Such a simple word, but it meant everything to Nora. Not a place, but a feeling. Safety, belonging, love. That night, as they came together as husband and wife for the first time, Nora gave herself to him without reservation. His touches were reverent, his whispered endearments sincere. In his arms, she found a passion she hadn't known existed and a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "I love you," she whispered in the darkness afterward, her head on his chest, his heartbeat strong beneath her ear. "And I love you." His fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "More than I have words to express." In that moment, Richard's threat seemed distant and powerless. Whatever came, they would face it together. The response to Richard's letter arrived in Boston 3 weeks after Nora and Vaughn's wedding. It was not what Richard Blackwell had expected. Instead of a frightened Nora begging for mercy or even a defiant refusal, the letter came from the territorial judge's office. It detailed the serious consequences of making false accusations of theft without evidence, particularly across state lines, which could constitute federal mail fraud. It mentioned that Mrs. Nora Thornton, née Valmont, was now married to one of Wyoming Territory's most respected ranchers, and that any further attempts to damage her reputation would be met with the full force of the law. A personal note from Vaughn was enclosed as well, its contents known only to Richard, but which caused the banker's face to drain of color when he read it. Richard Blackwell did not write again. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm for the newly married couple. Nora continued teaching, now riding to and from school on a beautiful mare that Vaughn had given her as a wedding present. The children adjusted quickly to calling her Mrs. Thornton, though some of the younger ones stumbled over the change. Mrs. Blackwood maintained a cool distance, but her open hostility had subsided. Perhaps it was the judge's letter, which Vaughn had made sure circulated appropriately. Or perhaps it was the way Joshua continued to flourish under Nora's guidance, developing a confidence his grandmother had never managed to instill. As Christmas approached, Nora threw herself into preparations with newfound joy. She helped the children decorate the schoolhouse with paper chains and pine boughs, organized a pageant for the town, and worked with Mrs. Cooper to plan a perfect first Christmas in their home. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire after a festive dinner with friends, Vaughn presented her with a small package wrapped in silver paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. They had already exchanged gifts that morning: a beautiful leather-bound journal from him, a hand-knitted scarf from her. "Something that arrived today. Open it." Inside was a letter and a small velvet box. The letter was from Victoria, Vaughn's sister in Denver, welcoming Nora to the family and apologizing for missing the wedding. The box contained a delicate gold locket with the Thornton family crest. "Victoria sent it as soon as I wrote her about our marriage," Vaughn explained. "It was our mother's, traditional for the Thornton bride." Tears pricked Nora's eyes as she opened the locket to find a tiny painted miniature of Vaughn inside. "It's beautiful, help me put it on." As his fingers brushed the nape of her neck, fastening the chain, she felt a wave of gratitude for this man who had given her not just his name and his protection, but a true partnership. "I have something for you too," she said softly. "Something I just discovered yesterday." His eyebrows rose in question. She took his hand and placed it over her still flat stomach. "A child, our child, due in summer, the doctor thinks." Vaughn's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby, you're certain?" She nodded, her own joy reflected in his face. "Dr. Hayes confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be sure before I told you." He gathered her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I never thought I could be this happy, nor I." She cupped his face in her hands. "Thank you for finding me when I was lost." "You weren't lost," he corrected gently. "You were running to where you belonged. I was just lucky enough to be waiting when you arrived." As the new year of 1879 dawned, Nora Thornton reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place. She had fled Boston in desperation, running from a life that would have smothered her true self. Along the way, she had found not just escape, but purpose. Not just safety, but love. Not just a place to hide, but a place to belong. The whispers and mockery that had followed her from Boston had faded into meaningless echoes. Here, in Vaughn's arms, in their home, in the community that had embraced her, she had found her true voice and the courage to use it. In July, their daughter Victoria Sarah Thornton was born, a robust baby with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined chin. As Nora watched Vaughn cradle their infant with hands that could break a wild horse, but touched his child with infinite tenderness, she knew with absolute certainty that every step of her journey had been leading her here. "What are you thinking about?" Vaughn asked, glancing up to find her watching them. "About running away," she replied honestly, "and how it led me exactly where I needed to be." He smiled, that crooked smile that still made her heart skip. "You didn't run away, Nora. You ran toward freedom, toward your true self." His eyes, so full of love, held hers. "And I'm grateful every day that your path ran straight to me." She crossed the room to join them, this family she had never dared to dream of. As Vaughn's arm encircled her and their daughter's tiny hand wrapped around her finger, Nora knew she had finally, truly come home.